Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Autre Terre. It is not intended for children.
Jack Morrow here. I got the call from Control. This comes from the Security Commission. They received intel that a supplier for Wickham Hall and Winter broke a deal. The rumor is that they are taking money from the Grand Masons. The Security Commission would prefer not to be named in any action we happen to take. It is not known what the deal covered, only that there was one. Mr. Wickham has put a bounty on the product. A favor would be useful, but, well, we're not their friends. Do what you need to do. I trust you, Jack. Wickham Hall in Winter is the anomalous version of Sotheby's. It's an auction house that specializes in things of the Autre Terre. Usually I raid their lightly defended caches when an opportunity allows. While much can be said of their legality, the real truth of the matter is that they do not care one bit what is legal and what is not, only that they can make a profit. From their perspective, if I liberate a Orthodox Byzantine icon that was never going to sell, I am freeing shelf space for more profitable items. Besides, the Autre Terre does not have a market for Christian artifacts, and even demons have a limit to what they can corrupt. When it comes to the things of heaven, I did them a favor. They have a warped sense of things. Money first, money always. It reminded me of a rich man who was buried with a briefcase full of gold bars. He came up to the gates of heaven and tried to buy his way in. One angel looks to the other and says, "He brought some paving stones." As far as I can tell, they don't exercise the same power or corruption of senators or groups like others do. They just have areas where they do business. I assume that there's a Scrooge McDuck money bin somewhere in there, and the three of them take baths in it. I downloaded the files and considered the picture of the gang. 5 Hispanic men posed over something. There was a blank spot of grass where something had bled. 2 of the men held up the now invisible beast. All of them wielded machetes and carried guns. They weren't me, but they were all hard men. If they were willing to deal with the Grand Masons, the prize must have been worth it. The same with their exit strategy. The Grand Masons were the Security Commission's most wanted. They were Daze's most wanted for reasons they won't tell anyone else. The Paranormal Pinkertons want them. I want them. I want the Grand Masons dead to a man. There had to be some clues in their camps or cell phones, or even just some GPS coordinates. These men were murderers, slavers, and more. They'd talk or they'd die. Either way, I'd contact Duke at Daze and give them to him when I was done with him. Whatever beef Daze has, I'll take precedence. It was difficult to track them. I had to abandon my trainees to the tender mercies of the old Shawnee for over a week. The best information available said that they were somewhere in the Ozarks. Well, the Ozarks are huge, and while not mountainous, they are full of places to hide. It took me 7 days of traipsing through small towns all over Missouri and Arkansas before I heard about 5 Hispanic men in a weird truck. Migrant laborers are not unusual enough to notice, but these men had a fight with some drunks and pulled knives. The drunks were lucky. They bolted when a cop pulled around the corner. Cops around here know better than to pry into the doings of strange men carrying strange things through the state. Chicago is a corrupt black hole, but something rots in the heart of Arkansas. They were seen headed towards Horsehead Lake. It was a good enough start. I took a day searching around the area. They weren't hard to find. It didn't surprise me that police were staying away. Arkansas police know their place, as I said. The 5 men were undisciplined. They had a guard or two, but no real patrol or standard armament. This may sound strange, but the more uniformity a group displays, the more likely military or federal involvement. Not always, but when has a rebel group access to 10,000 of the same rifle, or a revolutionary gang a single manufactured outfit? The founding fathers weren't so lucky. I planned my attack for the same night I found them. They had placed their tents in a circle with a fire in the middle. The guards looked into it and stayed near, staying warm, but they ruined their night vision. They did not like the Ozark winter. One of their tents was a fabric-covered cube. Around 6 p.m. they threw some meat into it. From what I could see, it was a tank of water. There were red lines I assumed were heaters. I did not see the inhabitants. The floor of their camp was an outcropping of rock that extended over Horsehead Creek. It was too wide for me to leap. The guards peered into the creek rather than wandering into the forest. I wish it would have been so easy. I would have to be the aggressor. I waited until midnight. There was one guard. It would be easy to incapacitate him. I wasn't concerned with many prisoners. They had to have a leader. That would be the important one to keep alive. They were working for the Grand Masons. They would have been enemies under normal circumstances. They were trying to be absolute enemies. They had done evil. They would do more evil with the Grand Masons backing them. They were in my territory. They were invaders. The best thing a man can do to make himself safe is to know his enemies and how to defend himself from them. I figured out which one was their leader and plotted my attack accordingly. I had brought a rifle, shotgun, my 1911, and a usual assortment of knives. This would be knife work. I made my first mistake the second I crossed the boundary of the camp. The guard turned to my direction and fired his gun. He looked, but his firing reaction was automatic. I dove out of the way the second I saw the man turn his body 180 degrees. I ran back into the forest almost on all fours. The 5 men were up and shouting. They had their weapons out and several fired Russian rifles into where I had been. After a moment of indecision, the 5 backed down and kept their eye on the forest. They were moving, but not well. They were hunters of beasts, not men, or at least not men less well armed than they were. One of them was bringing up a radio. I aimed my rifle at him first. The bullet hit his chest and he went down. I got up and changed position. 2 of the men ran to their fallen comrade. The other 2 sprayed down my assumed location. I did not much like striking men from the shadows like this, but better than being shot dead. I fired on one of the 2 men firing into the forest. I only hit his arm. He lost control of his weapon. Several bullets went into the tank of water until he fired dry. The one I marked as a leader shouted and pulled his triggerman down. Water was running out of the holes, but I didn't see any blood. The leader ran to the tank and threw off the tarpaulin. There were 2 figures in the water, huddled as far as they could from the noise of gunfire. They were both female, mermaids. One of them was a mother and the other her daughter. The mother was, not immense, but taller than I was. The daughter was shorter. They both had gray skin and almost black eyes. Both flinched from the light, but their motions were remarkably passive for the amount of teeth on display. Both their tails rested on the bottom of the tank, being too little water to float. The leader breathed a sigh of relief. Like all of the men who had been sleeping, he was wearing a wife-beater and military pants. This wasn't his first nighttime raid. Before I could get a good shot, he had a ballistics vest on. He pulled out a pair of handguns from hip holsters. He used them to direct his men. Soon all 4 remaining men had their guns out and eyes peeled. They ignored the radio and focused on me instead. I killed another with a careful headshot. He had stood still too long. I ran as soon as the bullet left the rifle barrel. 2 down, 1 wounded, 2 whole. The leader was whole. He led his shots, and a bullet struck a tree near me. Their eyesight was improving. With the fire at their back, mine could only be hurt. As much as I hated the old Shawnee, I loved his training. The Shawnees had led many nighttime raids, and being able to strike while blinded by firelight was important to their victory. I shot the wounded one again. I couldn't tell what I hit, but he howled and ran away into the forest, his nerve broken. The leader pulled his last man back into the camp and put the tank between me and him. He and his man kept watch on my approach angles. They thought I wouldn't shoot with the risk of damaging the mermaids. Maybe they thought I had been sent by Wickham Hall and Winters, or they thought I was part of the Security Commission or the Catholic Church or any of the more money-hungry outfits. I was willing to bank that a pair of mermaids could breathe in air, or at least have enough time to flop over into the creek. It looked deep enough to submerge their neck gills. I could save them if it was just me and them. I dropped the long rifle and picked up one of their dropped automatics. They had some weird version of the AK that the Soviets tested in revolutions around the world. It fired into the corners and sides of the tank. I pinned the 2 men. They huddled as close to the mermaids as the tank allowed. I dropped the rifle and aimed my shotgun. I put a slug into it. The cracks in the tank glass were spreading, but I needed something more violent for what I wanted. The slug round shattered the glass, and hundreds of gallons of water flooded out of the tank and into the camp. The noise was tremendous. I pumped another slug and fired into the 2 huddled men. One shouted, then lay still. The leader fired under the tank's trailer. The bullets kept me honest. I danced back. I had not brought brimstone rounds. Instead, I used plain deer shot. I tried to mimic the last man standing, but the 1887 shotgun, while accurate, could not navigate small space on the fly. I slung my shotgun and pulled out my 1911. The 2 mermaids had made it over the outcropping. They had not run for it, but kept the rock between them and the firefight. At this point, I had a couple of shots in my shotgun and a full magazine in my 1911. I had lost my rifle, no great loss. I waited for the leader to stop firing. "You don't have to die for this." "And you didn't have to come out of nowhere and kill my men." "This is my territory. All things of the Autre Terre are under my protection. I may kill them or free them as I please." "That's crazy." "I want to know who you work for. I want names and numbers. I want bank accounts and routing numbers. You'll tell me everything and I'll let you leave with your life." "Oh yeah? I die to you and I'm just dead. I betray Viet Vo. I die hard and slow." "I'll pass." He was playing for time. He was struggling to reload his weapons. I could see one hand was cut badly. I closed in. "Viet Vo your handler?" "I don't know, crazy man. He was just some merc who worked with me in Panama. Real hard case. Harder than you. This world is all about connections. Ain't nothing to fear from a single man." "Surrender in the name of Christ." I leaped over the metal frame of the trailer and pointed my 1911 at him. He tried to aim his gun at my head. I fired first. Well, I holstered my 1911. At least I could find his electronics and personal information. I decided to check on the mermaids first. Before I reached the edge, I heard the ka-thunk of a grenade launcher. I dove for the stone lip, but it was too late. The pressure hit me like a roundhouse kick to the chest, except over every inch of my body. I felt some cuts, but I fell unconscious before I hit the water. I came to in the embrace of the larger mermaid, including a set of her teeth in my shoulder. The smaller one was huddled behind her mother. The big one was not ripping or tearing my flesh. One of her hands and her tail was braced against the cave mouth. She wasn't strong enough to grab me with one hand. My ears rang. My hearing came back after a few moments, and I thanked God that my eardrums hadn't burst. The shark mermaid was mumbling to me, but I couldn't hear it past my flesh and clothing in her mouth. I said nothing. Instead, I heard the sounds of boots running over and around above our heads. I slapped her side twice, which felt exactly like shark skin, except with a bit of slime. It was rough, but it had a give to it that wasn't unpleasant. She let go of me, and her eyes opened. I put a finger to my lips. I crawled up the side of the rock. The boots were somewhere above, examining the camp. If that was Viet Vo, he might have been looking for survivors. There was a gunshot. He was definitely looking for survivors. I was careful not to splash or disturb the rocks. I pulled myself up to peek over the edge. A thick-bodied Asian man was flipping the body of the radio man, checking for something. I had my 1911 out. His eyes, hidden by small black lens spectacles, flicked towards me. I fired, but he was already moving. The bullets flew over his head. I cursed. I had to be careful. I vaulted for the edge and ran for the metal trailer. Instead of diving, I crouched behind it. He had a tent between me and him. "I'll give you the same deal I gave the dead men around us." The man I assumed was Viet Vo laughed. "I'll give you those coyotes' answer." "That their name? Their leader called you a mercenary. I have authority to buy you off. I have gold, or perhaps something more esoteric. Contracts like mine can't be bought off, Jack Morrow. I did warn those fools of you, and they did take some of my advice in, but they forgot that numbers mean nothing to a man with no sense of self-preservation and a highly honed instinct for violence. Besides, betraying my employers would ruin my reputation. Say, how much blood have you lost so far?" I had lost a good deal. I couldn't tell if my lightheadedness was a very probable concussion or the blood loss from the grenade shrapnel. Probably both. I searched the bodies of the leader and his last minion that lay at my feet. One of them had their weird AKs. I pulled it and put some bullets between me and the voice of Viet Vo. He wasn't by the left-hand tents. He had been moving, just like I should have been. I turned in time to spray lead into the other tents. I was gratified to hear a yelp. I tried to focus in, but the gun jammed. I threw it down and aimed my 1911 at the voice. I shot near to where I thought his body was. Pax, let's negotiate." Viet Vo's voice was pained. "My terms are simple. Throw down your weapons and give yourself up. If your contract can't be broken, I understand. I just need a hint. Something to lead me to the Grand Masons. A meeting place. An abandoned facility. A trail of crumbs. I'm hungry for them, Viet Vo. My business is personal. I'm sure you have a network of corruption across the supernatural world. You'll be fine. I won't raise a finger against you. I just need something." Viet Vo was leaning against a low rock. He had several bullets in his side, and he clutched the wounds. He had a rifle with an underslung grenade launcher. It, with a large number of other weapons and knives and more, was piled away from him. The Vietnamese man wrote down coordinates onto a pad of paper and threw it at my feet. "It's a meeting ground they use for mercs like me. I couldn't tell you much about it. It's a location in the Rockies. I've been there 3 times. I can't name who I saw there without violating my contracts, but I'm being very precise if you get me. Point is, it's very probable that there's something you can use around there. We good? I pocketed the note. I'll call Days. I kept a gun on the man. Viet Vo gasped. Suits me fine. He pulled out a first aid kit from his backpack and started to work. He squinted at me through his dark glass spectacles. Not gonna lie, Jack. If they put a contract on your life, I might take it. I ignored his comment. Days brought a couple of helicopters. The mermaids, nursing shark mermaids of all things, were loaded onto one of them, Viet Vo on the other. I left with Unismasher after answering some of their questions. Of course, I told them nothing about the location Viet Vo gave me. No need to spread that information around. I'm pretty badly scratched up. The explosion did not hit anything vital, or I would have known it already, but I'm going to have to rest and recover for a little while. Give me time to prepare. Then again, Viet Vo could be sending me into a trap. In fact, I guarantee to anyone that he is. If it gives me a lead on Jeremiah Pike, it'll be worth it. I'm going to bring in Jim Donavan for this one. Jack Morrow, out.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ben Wheeler and is performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhosts, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.